Good evening, everyone. Happy December and welcome to Cafe Muse. Thank you, Michael Davis, for that beautiful guitar performance. I'm Ellen Cole and I'm hosting tonight. Henry Crawford, our very much appreciated technical wizard, will be behind the scenes doing his magic. Tonight, we'll be featuring readings from the anthology 101 Jewish Poems for the Third Millennium. And Nancy Naomi Carlson, who co-edited the anthology, along with Matthew E. Silverman, will be emceeing tonight's program. 6 poets whose work is in the collection will be reading tonight. David Ebenbach, Dina Ellen Bogan, Roger Greenwald, Susan Rich, Carly Sachs, and Philip Terman. We encourage you to buy a copy of the anthology tonight and to donate to Cafe Muse to support our literary program. You can find the link for buying the book and for making a donation on our chat. Audience members have been muted. This helps to prevent feedback for our readers and ensures uninterrupted programming. Please bear with us if we do encounter a technical glitch. During the reading, you may use the chat to comment or ask a question that our readers may answer during the Q&A period, moderated by Karen Alanier if time permits. Our program runs for 1 hour. Our next Cafe Muse reading will be on Monday, January 8th, and will feature 2 beloved local poets, Grace Cavalieri, Maryland's Poet Laureate, and Susan Oki, who for many years was one of Cafe Muse's co-hosts. The program will be live at the Writers' Center in Bethesda, weather permitting. I'm a huge fan of all of our programs, but I think this reading and this book are particularly important. In a time when anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and ethnic hatred of every stripe is surging in the US and around the world, it's urgent that poetry like this is heard because of poetry's power to dispel prejudice and open a window into the hearts and minds of people who are often othered. So thank you, Nancy and Matthew, for putting this important collection out into the world. Nancy Naomi Carlson is an award-winning translator and a superb poet, essayist, and editor. Nancy was the winner of the 2022 Oxford Weidenfeld Translation Prize, as well as recipient of 2 literature translation fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts. She's the author of 4 non-translated books and 8 books of translations. Most recently, Piano in the Dark, a volume of her own work, and Delicates, co-translated with poet Hope Esperanza Snyder. Nancy is a personal friend of mine, and I've watched in awe while she has built her career and reputation. Her poems are skillfully crafted, sensitive, melodic, and emotive, and her translations are equally skilled and powerful. And so, here is the multi-talented Nancy Naomi Carlson, who will introduce us to 6 contributors to 101 Jewish Poems for the Third Millennium: David Ebenbach, Dina Ellen Bogan, Roger Greenwald, Susan Rich, Carly Sachs, and Philip Terman.
Thank you, Ellen, for that beautiful introduction. And Thank you for your friendship through these years as well. Um, I want to thank Cafe Muse for hosting us, to Karen Ellen here for this series, and Henry for the tech support, and Luther Jet for being the liaison. And I see Renee in the audience and Majda. So thank you all for this. And thank you, audience, some of whom are contributors to our anthology, 101 Jewish poems for the third millennium. And Michael, thank you for that beautiful music. I was lulled with the pictures and the music together, just put us all in a very calm state of mind. So this is our book that we're here to celebrate, 101 Jewish poems for the third millennium. And we're very happy to have this. It came out in 2021, but it was a pandemic book. So we had some Zoom readings, but not really any in-person events with it. So I feel like it hasn't gotten all that it can get. And Matthew and I are very proud of it. It's Matthew's brainchild. So he came up with the idea to have this anthology, and we put out the call. Um, we got over 800 submissions, and we then chose the 101 to be very diverse. So we have Jewish and non-Jewish poets here represented. We have poems that were originally written in English and those which are translations. We have secular Jews, we have Orthodox Jews. Um, so we have quite a mix. We have emerging poets and very well-known ones. And we were lucky to get Ashland Poetry Press to say, we are delighted to publish this. We sent out far and wide, and Jen Rathbun was our editor and did a wonderful job. Tonight we're going to have a sampling of these poems, and we have 6 contributors who will read about 6 minutes each. Then we'll look at what the time looks like. I might read a 60-second poem, and then we may have question and answer, but none of that afterwards might happen either. So thank you, audience, for coming, and let's take it away with our first reader. David Ebenbach is the author of 9 books of poetry, fiction, and nonfiction, including his poetry collection, What's Left to Us by Evening, and his creativity guide, The Artist's Torah. He lives in Washington, D.C. with his family. Here's David.
Thank you so much, Nancy. And thanks to Cafe Muse, absolutely so much. And thanks to all of you for being here. It is really an honor to be part of this great anthology, 101 Jewish Poems for the Third Millennium. And correct me if I'm wrong, Nancy, but I think scientists have recently demonstrated this makes an excellent holiday gift. So be sure to pick that up. But I'm actually going to start with a couple of poems that are not in there, including from What's Left to Us by Evening. And I know you're already buying the anthology for the holidays, but there's eight nights of Hanukkah and like 12 of Christmas, I think somebody said. So things have been pretty tough lately. So I'm going to start by reading a poem that I found soothing to write. It's called Saturday Morning. Despite everything, sun finds the synagogue window. Despite everything, stretches into the sanctuary, whitening the white walls, polishing the wood floors, touching shoulders and hair with warm hands, finds us gathered from our many daily exiles, already singing. That's that one. Well, thank you. And also, again, still several nights left. My second collection, Some Unimaginable Animal. It's just about to be Hanukkah, so I'm going to read a poem called Hanukkah. And we just decorated our place yesterday, and we usually go kind of nuts with it. So this is sort of about that. Hanukkah. This year we spangle the place. The door wrapped like something we're giving away. The whole living room wrapped, coffee table a jumble of wind-up toys and candy dishes, the seam of the wall into ceiling a braid of lights, illuminating plastic chunks of holiday kitsch. The bookshelves, the rug, everything is plastic now, is sequins, is glitter, stars and dreidels, dreidels and stars, everything held up with tape. Meanwhile, the gifts are underfoot in every direction. And sure, we make it dark, light switch by light switch, unplug the string of bulbs, let the candles make their quiet points. But then we plug the strings back in and tap the uncooperative set until it works. That's from Some Unimaginable Animal. And then, as promised, 101 Jewish poems. And I have this bookmark of like a Catholic saint marking my spot because I teach at Georgetown University, and this poem represents sort of the cross-cultural experience that has been for me. It's called "While They Choose a New Pope, I Eat a Bagel." These are old occupations. In Vatican City, there is no Wi-Fi, not until after they've sent their white smoke rising. Black smoke means they're still at it. Here, it would mean the bagel's burning. There's no white kind. They used to carry them around on sticks, which is why the hole in the middle, and we keep it even though sometimes the butter ends up pooling right in the center of the plate. We keep things the way they are. The cardinals, do they sit around a table, a dark table older than America? They may have bagels of their own, though it's hard to imagine them licking cream cheese off their thumbs. But things do change. They used to lock the bishops in the chapel until they got it done, and now there are hotels and buses. They wake up to a coffee maker, maybe a continental breakfast. And I've got a toaster and a food processor to make the hummus, everything I need. There may be windows up high up in the wall, shuttered. Nobody's allowed to see things in process. The cardinals crowd around, one of them almost a pope. Me, I'm already eating the bagel. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you, David. The bagel. We love the bagel. We didn't have any bagel contributions. So we said we've got to get that one. Next up is Dina Ellenbogen, who is the author of the memoir Drawn from Water and the poetry collections Apples of the Earth and Shore. She's received fellowships from the Illinois Arts Council and has published widely in magazines and anthologies. She has a poetry MFA from the Iowa Writers Workshop and teaches at the University of Chicago. Welcome, Dina.
Thank you so much, Nancy, for the introduction. And thank you, Cafe Muse, for this wonderful venue. And thank you again, Nancy and Matthew, for inviting me to read. I'm going to begin with my poem that was in 101 Jewish poems of the third millennium. And it's also in my poetry collection, Shore. So I'm going to read it from there just to stay organized with my other poems. And this poem that I'm going to begin with is a pantoum, which is a repetitive form where the second and fourth line of one stanza become the first and third of the next, and then the first line becomes the last line of the poem, slightly altered based on what went on in the poem. And you don't have to remember all of that, but I thought I would give you that information. This is called A Voice. In the beginning, a whimper, pounding of heart steps, whispers of open fists, prayer notes in stone. Pounding of heart steps, chirps of morning songs, prayer notes in stone, the language of angels. Chirps of morning songs, a girl stands at the threshold, hears the language of angels, her own music breaking. A girl woman stands at the threshold, chants the first words of Torah, her own voice breaking into stones with burning names. When a woman chants the first word, she finds inside her own voice stones with burning names. A cry becomes a scream. She finds inside her own voice a silence, a sigh, an exultation. A cry becomes a scream, a song of abundance. A silence, a sigh, an exultation. When a woman reaches the highest note in her abundant song, even the stones begin to tremble. This next poem is called I Asked for Light. I asked for light in the missing tree, promised more light. I asked for the names of the dead in Pittsburgh, New Zealand, Chicago, heard only numbers, 50 dead in Christchurch, saw faces, no longer innocent or alive. Without canopies of leaves, there is nothing between us and the sky, between us and strangers, undressing behind shades across the way. I don't know the names of those shot down in a mosque, a synagogue, or the far corners of my city. Nothing shields us, and the wind howls syllables of lost names. What do we make of the hollowness in the center? What can we plant as streets empty of American elms and shutters close against centuries of loss? I peel them open rung by rung, reach for the hands of strangers kneeling across prayer rugs. Hope comes in small increments of light. This next poem that I'm going to read is also a pantoum. It's also from Shore, and it was written for the installation of Rabbi Andrea London of Beth Emet Synagogue in Evanston, and today is her special birthday, a special birthday, so I wanted to read this. And it was also inspired by Jacob's encounter with the angel in the book of Genesis. And I usually don't write poems on assignment, but this is one that I was assigned to do, and it actually ended up being a lot of fun. And I would never have written anything like this had I not been given this particular assignment. On rising. Rest your head on sacred stone, awaken to the faces of angels, wrestle your way to a new name, a house with veiled windows. Awaken to the faces of angels, whisper your way to abandoned air, a house with veiled windows where sparrows land and ascend. Whisper your way to abandoned air, language rises, a mist of flying geese, sparrows land and ascend, take the names of angels. Language rises, a mist of flying geese, in the paths of mother birds who take the names of angels before they reappear. In the shadows of mother birds who fly beyond broken clouds before they reappear on ladders to open windows. Who fly beyond broken clouds, land in a house of worship, on ladders to open windows, between words in the unspoken. Land in a house of worship, where we come face to face between words in the unspoken. Rest our heads on sacred stone. I've been thinking a lot about the unspoken during this moment in time. So I'm going to read a new poem, which was written on November 17th, that I think speaks to this moment, or one small part of this moment. It's called In Fields. You were promised pomegranates hanging from trees, not the names of captives on passing lampposts, not sirens howling after dusk, not the aftermath of missiles nor faces of the missing plastered to ancient acacias. Far away, a truck carries loads of pumpkins, how round and orange. A black cat crosses my path while birches burn into autumn, not bodies, not fruits, only images blurring in and out of screens to where fingers and arms and a lost bear absorb the secrets of fields. You gather apples that should have been harvested last season. Near the border, there is still an abundance of peppers. You reach the green ones that sting your eyes when you wipe them, scream names of the missing, lest they become a whisper, a disappearing hope. Thank you.
Thank you, Dina, and I'm in awe with your pantoums. So we have next up Roger Greenwald, a New Yorker living in Toronto. He's had poetry in numerous journals and has published 3 collections, most recently Slow Mountain Train and The Half-Life, both from Tiger Bark. He's won the CBC Literary Award twice and the 2018 Gwendolyn McEwen Poetry Prize from Exile magazine. Welcome, Roger.
Thanks, Nancy. The first poem I'll read is a slightly shorter revised version of the one in the anthology. It was prompted by questions I was asked, believe it or not, on several occasions in Norway. Why I am not an Indian? I am not an Indian because you've never seen one or you wouldn't ask. I am not an Indian because I am a Jew, and don't ask what percentage. When I say Jew, I mean through and through, though few who are Orthodox would say so. It's true no one knows where we came from, and my mother's mother, with a tan, could have looked Mongolian, could have come from people who millennia before wandered eastward with their horses and eventually rode into the cowboy films of my New York childhood, where she, escaped from the pogroms, held a sugar cube between her teeth to sweeten her lemony Russian tea. But no, I am not an Indian. So look again, look in. This is called Pitch Black Days. The title and the quotation in it come from Henry Roth's novel, Call It Sleep. Pitch Black Days supposedly is a phrase that means the past. Pitch black days. The pitch black days are still full of light. They lived in the high latitudes of summer and in winter shone with snow. If only they had slowly turned into the shadowed half and lost themselves in equatorial torpor. The rabbi was wrong. If it was long ago, then long ago was already too late for your weeping. Like yesterday, Reb, it will never fade while I breathe. Bright memory burns my heart to an ember of tar. The pitch black days are now. Alam Khan is the son of the famous Sarod master Ali Akbar Khan. Alam Khan plays the 25-string sarod. Past midnight, the Indian women wrap their shawls around their shoulders. The men draw them close, wrap their arms around the shawls, except for those who have no one. One man's peace is another man's sorrow. The 25-string sarod is an instrument of such beauty. Even the sound it makes when being tuned can bring a listener to tears. Just as it is said, even the ornaments on the Hebrew letters of the Torah could be interpreted by the greatest rabbis. But here, every nuance is in the hands of the player, except that his hands are the hands of his father and grandfather before him, and this too can bring listeners to tears, especially those who have no one. And the last poem I'll read is called Baul. It's spelled B-A-U-L. It's the name of a sect in Bengal. And in this case, it refers to musicians who were usually mendicant musicians. Baul. When the singer has begun to drum and begins, when his foot with its cluster of bells has joined the drum and he begins to sing. The faces of the people seated on floor and bench and chair are all smiles. Their bare and socked feet are smiling too. Private concert, singer all the way from Bangladesh. But when he has sung a while of how the soul cannot be kept within the body, impossible, he says, impossible to do that, but also to translate what the song says is impossible. When his dark voice has risen in plainted complaint, and the ornaments too have carried upward their own quavering cries, the corners of mouths turn down, the gazes wander inward. Each person finds a private translation. As the singer continues, the bells and drums get older. They go back 1,000 years. The voice gets older. For millennia, it has traveled, has collected many turns, and left behind its own. The wailing tremolo of Hebrew prayers, the smoky chant of Nubian oud players. The man of the heart, where is he? The woman of the heart, where is she? Who is she? Or, if God will not come to you, you must come to God. The gaze turning inward, the thought unbidden, easier to find God than the woman of the heart or the man. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. You had me at the pitch black days are now.
Yeah.
Next up is Susan Rich, whose books include Gallery of Postcards and Maps, New and Selected Poems, and Cloud Pharmacy. Her work has garnered awards from the Fulbright Foundation, PEN USA, and the Times Literary Supplement. Her poems appear in Harvard Review, New England Review, Poetry Ireland, and elsewhere. Her sixth collection, Blue Atlas, arrives in 2024. Susan.
Hi, thank you, Naomi. Can everyone hear me okay? Is that working? Great. It's always so weird to sit in your own house and broadcast across the country. I'm really happy to be part of this anthology. And I am actually, as of today, the book that Naomi said is coming out in 2024. I've just gotten my very first advanced reader copies of. So I'm going to take off my background, if I can figure out how to do that, and show you the book, because you're the first people who are going to hear me read from this. And this is the book that was in the poem that was in the anthology, Pregnant with the Dead. So it's just kind of wonderful timing that tonight is the night and that the book arrived only hours ago. It's also a movie. It got made into a film by a New York filmmaker. So if you Google Pregnant with the Dead, you can watch a sort of 7-minute video. Pregnant with the Dead. I am a woman swollen with the history of my dead. Great aunts and second cousins murdered in the old country, bloated with fragments of survivors who hid months in garbage cans, others in partisan forests. On their bandaged daughters, gauzed from toe to forehead to keep safe from search patrols, from their first rapes. Yes, I am a body awash in stories of noodlekugel, borscht. Watch the heavy arms of the women waving like sails as they knead challah each Friday morning. Can't conceive of an afternoon free. What can I do with the women who occupy my vertebrae, take over my hips and tongue? They say coconut bars, Mandelbread, Hammentaschen. They say that's your problem as they stride into the kitchen, toss out the non-fat yogurt, the tofu treats. It's a rumba of before and after. And of course, many Vok murdered, abducted our girls, butchered our sons. But now my dead tell me it's time to enjoy a brioche, a week in the Disneyland. Don't my dead deserve to miss their skin with Shalimar at the airport perfume cathedrals? Enough time spent on nightmares. Instead, let us hike up the heat, make selfies. And later, when it quiets on the hotel balcony, we vanish like light vessels, almost escaped out to sea. When Naomi mentioned that we were like, that the anthology was low on bagel poems, I thought, do I have a poem with a bagel in it? It's not in the anthology, but here's a new poem that hasn't been out in the world yet. It's called Post-Surgical Love Sonnet. For the first 2 weeks, you live in awe of the particles and atoms you meet, the medullary rays of the oak dresser, the arc of sandpipers in flight, cotton sheets. For 14 days, you gaze into the garden, astonished at the resilience of bindweed and horsetail. You're an heiress of the inhabited world. Everything bagels and dinosaur kale. Expeditions to the bathroom offer sentient thrills. You urinate and defecate with ease. And the bruised stars along your abdomen, zippers for survival. You're awake, alive, here, still. In the depths of the body, there is a door, slightly ajar, where you sense your temporal audacity, your power. I'm just checking, I'm trying to check if I have time for one more short one. Does that sound right, Naomi? Yes, one more short one. Okay, let's go for it. This poem is called The K Word, which I'm thinking most people here are familiar with. The poem's called The K Word, from Keikel, for circle as signature drawn by Eastern European Jews who, as they entered at Ellis Island, refused to use the X, too similar to Christ's Roman error cross. The very first time I heard it in the dorm's white kitchenette, Massachusetts freshman year, offered like an illicit kiss, kismet, by an upperclassman I admired. Kikes have little horns under their caps, Marianne offered, her assertion backlit in September's window of burning red and russet leaves. We lingered over the tea kettle. What more might I have said? So sure her words were true, I felt my own skull for signs.
Thank you, Susan, and congratulations on Blue Atlas, the book and the film. Next up, we have Carly Sachs, who is the author of The Steam Sequence and Descendants of Eve. She is the editor of The Why and Later, a collection of poems about rape and assault. Her poems and stories have been included in the Best American Poetry Series and read on NPR's Selected Shorts. She works for the Jewish Federation of the Bluegrass, where she serves as the PJ Library Coordinator. Carly.
Thank you so much, Nancy Naomi Carlson, and just so honored and grateful to be included in this anthology and to be reading with everyone tonight. I do have a DC connection, and so it's so nice to see some friends from back in my DC days. So welcome, thanks for coming. And I'm going to read 3 poems. The first one is from the anthology, and it's called Talmud Study. How do you measure anything? Count your deaths. Who loves you? Who loves you not? Today, you are the ox. Tomorrow, the victim of the gorging ox. You build a house. You are holy, but your walls are shaky. Inside, there is wine to be drunk. Outside, there's a plague. You are on the wrong page. Someone is coming to town on a donkey. He will insult your intelligence, then ask for forgiveness. Everything is a ratio, parts of the whole. You watch the ants as they crawl across your plate. You snuff out every third one with your pinky finger. Years later, they will say blood, frogs, boils. But what are they remembering? Your house is falling. Who is the protagonist, and what is it that he wants? And the next poem that I'm going to read is called A Woman of Valor. Walking by the fire pit at Shaker Village, a group of older couples are gathered. Autumn, Kentucky. My daughter points and says, Shabbat, Shabbat, so loud. In my daughter's brain, fire equals Shabbat. Every week, we light 2 candles and say blessings. It doesn't matter that it's never 18 minutes before sundown. We just light them and get on with dinner. But here, I'm self-conscious, all their gazes turning towards us. Someone else's child would say fire. For a moment, I'm 16 again in Krakow, sun gleaming across the Vistula. We had just come from McDonald's, so full of teenagerness. We are loud, the only ones on the bridge until we see it. A shop cart full of Jew dolls, little rabbis with tails and horns holding coins. And a few years later, on a trip to the Holocaust Museum, I had already seen Auschwitz, Majdanek, Treblinka. I wept looking at dolls and games, Nazi propaganda, proof that hatred can be taught, marketed, and sold. And then here I am again, all woman, mother, lighting the match of my own voice. And this final poem that I'm going to read is called Baking Challah on Grandma Tootie's Yard Site. And for some of you, you can follow me on Instagram at Challah, y'all. My daughter and I started baking challah in the pandemic. She was 2.5 when we started. She's 5 now. So we've been baking challah every Shabbat for 2.5 years now. And we fill it with some pretty amazing things. So you can check that out. And I'll put that link in later if you're curious. But this poem is about baking challah on Grandma Tootie's yard site. After my grandma died, my mom gave me a laminated copy of the emotional hygiene creed Grandma Tootie kept in her purse. I don't know if sensitivity and worry come natural to Jewish women, something in our genes. My friend Jessica says we carry our ancestral pain in our bodies. I think of this as I watch the yeast bubbling as I make challah, the part I am the most anxious over. Why do I care so much? To get something right, to control what ultimately can't be controlled, which is everything. On the counter, the yahrzeit candle burns. I do not expect to get precisely what I wanted from this world. I will not kick against the annoyances of life. My grandma never talked to me about what she lived through, or that she carried this creed in her purse since 1962. I wonder what I will tell my daughter. She learned to walk in a pandemic, that a few days before she stirred her first challah dough, a man wearing a Camp Auschwitz sweatshirt was storming Nancy Pelosi's office in the Capitol. At 2.5, she knows what Shabbat is, what challah is. I follow my friend Nina's advice. I start the braid from the center, then work down each end. Even though afraid, anxious, and worried, I shall continue with my activities, knowing that fear is the normal stimulus to courage. I will laugh more every day. This is what it is to be a matriarch, to offer what I can, to make a weekly bread, to give my loved ones something warm and delicious to hold. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carly. What can't be controlled, which is everything. Our last reader is Philip Terman, and his most recent books are This Crazy Devotion, Broadstone, Our Portion, New and Selected Poems, Autumn House, and as co-translator with Saleh Razouk, Tango Beneath a Narrow Ceiling, the selected poems of Riyad Saleh Hussein, Bitter Oleander. He co-directs the Jewish Poets Reading Series sponsored by the JCC in Buffalo. Phil?
All right, thank you. And what a pleasure to be in this anthology and to read with such wonderful poets for such wonderful people. Thank you so much. Appreciate it very much. I'm going to read two poems. The first one is called My Russian Jewish Grandparents and the Birth Parents of Our Chinese Child Meet at a Cafe and Discuss Our Child's Future. Can you hear me okay? Yeah? I know you can't see me very well because my camera is terrible, but it's all about hearing anyway. Shmuel and Malka and our child's Chinese birth parents are sipping tea at a cafe somewhere between the Pale settlement of Russia and central rural China. They speak in signs and gestures, swirling arms like dancers, shaping fingers into figures, standing up and swaying, contorting bodies to emphasize some obscure point, even employing pauses and long silences to further the conversation. The men gesture. My grandfather's yarmulke is as black as I imagine our child's birth father's hair. The women continue to fill their husbands' cups and stare off into the distance. The men agree on the major issue. Each will have to sacrifice their darlings, their children, and send them away across miles of land and ocean into a realm further and more unfamiliar than they could understand even in their own tongue. A place perhaps like those far away and never lands in the stories of each of their childhoods. Palace on a cloud, temple beyond the stars, Jerusalem or Shangri-La. It's better to think of that strange country that way than to ponder the potential dangers, strangers in strange lands, years of forced labor, the poverty and destitution they themselves know something about, each in their own way, these farmers and peddlers, each of them know dark to dark. Their gestures are more subtle and sophisticated now. They even forget and sometimes break out into their Yiddish and Mandarin, which sounds as exotic as a gathering of multicolored birds singing through the tea's steam. The bill, which is grief, arrives. They agree to split it. They accompany each other to the gate that opens out into their separate centuries. Through unfathomable signs, they gesture to meet again. Okay, and the poem in the anthology, thank you, is called Isaiah at Rest. You know, it wasn't just all swords and plowshares for him. He needed a break once in a while. So this is called Isaiah at Rest. All day I've been reading Isaiah, who I imagine to be ordinary, in love with a woman who, like you, grows and then cooks the vegetables and only cares about the happy life. Ye shall be confounded for the gardens that ye have chosen doesn't apply to her. He meant it in a more rhetorical way. And when he arrived home late, his voice gone, his throat aching, feet scarred and scratched from all the hard roads, she puts in front of him a bowl of last season's harvest: potatoes, tomatoes, carrots, onions, basil, fennel, dill. It tastes in his mouth not as the tongue of fire devours the stubble, or as the dry grasses sinketh down into the flame, but more flavorful of their earth than the live coals that touched his lips and took away his iniquities. He loosens the girdle of righteousness from his waist and takes off completely the girdle of faithfulness from his loins, being in any case more full of the knowledge of his sources. All flesh is grass, he whispers into her ear, and the smell of his fiery breath makes her ask him to whisper it again. Thanks.
Thank you, Phil. All flesh is grass. And thank you, readers, for leaving me a minute to read one poem, my poem from the anthology. I have a tendency to marry men who are not Jewish, and I keep doing that. My Goyisha ex-husband. For 18 years, he was the one of the chosen to help knead the challah dough. Yeast and sugar dissolved in a tepid bath, oil mixed with eggs, flour sifted on top. Flour dusted his hands like pollen, like ash, what we might have buried if given the chance, before our baby, born blue but alive, was whisked away, and we, not knowing to question Jewish law, halakha, our son deemed stillborn for not having lived out a month. A mishap of DNA was to blame, but what were the odds that our bloods, mine Ashkenazic and his from a Swedish coast, would carry the same mutant gene? We could not keep grief from our home or from sticking to skin. Unlike the dough, whose lumps we tried to best, a pinch of flour one at a time, so it could rise, become more than itself, to be rolled into ropes of 3 or 6, then braided like hair of the Sabbath queen and left to rise again on a parchment tray before baked to a perfect gold. Thank you. And now, Karen, take it away.
You know, it occurs to me, and hearing everybody read, that the theme of bread was very important tonight, and the theme of braided bread, came in various ways. You know, we had the pantoum, which is a braiding of the poetic line. And so I was wondering if anybody wants to speak to the importance of symbolism in poetry and what it means to the Jewish poem. Maybe Nancy could start this, and she's the one who is commander of all things as the editor.
Well, first off, that was brilliant to see the themes here and to get the braided pantoum. I'm still in awe of that. The thing about Jewish poetry, what is Jewish poetry? But there are some things that if you're Jewish here or around the world, you recognize. And it's almost like a symbol that means similar things, but then you take it and you put your own meaning to it with your own circumstances. And here we heard about challah, but we heard about making challah in a different context. So the symbol is there. This is our tradition. These are our roots. It's been passed down generation to generation from time and space. And yet we take them and try to use them in a fresh way that represents us in our unique view. Help me out here, contributors.
I think symbolism is one of those things that it sort of lives in two places. On the one hand, it's really essential, and I think most poems that are resonant have some symbolism, and I think that you can wreck a poem in under 10 seconds by coming at it with a symbol, coming from the beginning and saying, I'm going to jam this symbol in there. I think if it's more like if you live a life where you are exposing yourself to the connections between things, then you're going to have a lot of associations bouncing around in your mind, and you'll write about X, but you'll be talking about Y at the same time, because both are true at the same time. But I think that's how symbols, for me, need to arise in a much less intentional way.
I think more in terms of metaphor, I guess, than symbol. And very often that's the impetus for a poem. Something will come up, like, for example, the last poem that I read, I was driving along and I saw a truckload of pumpkins. And I liked that image early on of the pumpkins with the music. That worked nicely. And so I was thinking about the pumpkins, and I was thinking about my friends who are in the fields in Israel picking, vegetables and fruit, that people who are, missing or, involved in the war in some way or another were unable to gather. And so it was really associative in that way. I'm thinking pumpkins, and they just looked so innocent. I was just thinking about Halloween in America and what's going on in the Mideast. And, so very often it will begin with some kind of image. And sometimes the image stays in the poem, sometimes it doesn't, but it's really what brings about the poem in a lot of circumstances.
I think it's time to turn back the program to our host, Ellen Cole, who will close us out. Thank you so much, Nancy, and all of your contributors. It was a very fine evening of very wonderful poems that spoke to lots of issues, but mostly to the soul of poetry.
And Karen, thank you for your very interesting question. I don't know how I would have answered it. So I admire all of you for your answers. And thank you, Nancy, for curating this terrific, powerful, funny, scary, and delicious reading. I feel like running out and making a kugel immediately. I also want to thank Michael again for his lovely and inspiring music, and Henry for the slideshow. Thanks to Karen Alanier and the WordWorks for sponsoring Cafe Muse, and Henry again for his technical expertise. We couldn't get along without you. And thanks also to my fellow co-hosts, Renee Garrity, Majda Gama, Henry Crawford, Luther Jett, and Claire McGough. And most importantly, thank you, our wonderful audience, for being here. If you want to watch tonight's program again, it will be up on Cafe Muse's YouTube channel, and you can extend your enjoyment by purchasing the anthology and our poets' individual books. The link for the anthology is in the chat, and telling others about this series. I hope you'll join us for the next Cafe Muse program on Monday, January 8th at 7 o'clock, featuring some beloved local poets, Grace Cavalier and Susan Oakey. Please make sure you're registered on the Cafe Muse website so you'll get the information for the event as well as the Zoom link. Have a wonderful evening, a festive and light-filled December and New Year's. And I hope we'll see you in January. Good night.